I don't have, one simple trick to protect your property rights to the in-game, but what I can say with absolute certainty is that the worse things get, the cheaper they get in gold and silver terms.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 23rd through June 30th, 2025, while supplies last. This week we feature 1-ounce silver backdated Australian Kangaroos at just $2.99 over spot per ounce. And with the Australian Kangaroo Monster Box at just 250 ounces, these are some of the lowest priced monster boxes on the market. Next, backdated platinum 1-ounce Australian platypus coins are just $119 over spot. And 1 10th-ounce Canadian maple leaves are only $45 over melt per coin. And finally, constitutional silver dealer's choice dimes and quarters are just 99 cents over spot per ounce. Again, some of the lowest premiums we've seen on silver in years. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty and Finance. We're delighted to have this enthusiastically received returning guest. Phil Lowe is a founder of the Bitter Draught. He's here with us again on Liberty and Finance to talk about some common sense answers to otherwise mystifying questions that our audience may be interested in asking. Phil, thank you for joining us this Friday, June 27th, 2025.
Excited to be here again, Dunnigan.
You've been with us, maybe half a dozen times, and each time we've been kicking the tires on some concepts that may be in our near future as far as what money is going to be like in the near future, how we can prepare for it, whether we can look to the history and things that have happened as a guide to what may be coming up just around the corner here. You've got a few more suggested topics here we'd like to get into with your help. The first one is about the recent law that was passed in Florida for a legal tender declaration about gold and silver. There's actually been quite a bit of controversy around that. It sounds like it's not just a one-sided victory for the home team, because there's some complexities around it that are going to impact different treatment for different types of bullion, which can be concerning for those who have been assuming that it did or didn't make a difference what they collected along the way. So that's one thing that I'm aware of. But you have a question here. Despite Florida passing gold and silver legal tender laws, why does Gresham's law prevent Federal Reserve notes, that's our fiat currency that everybody's familiar with, what we call the paper dollar, from being abandoned in favor of sound money? Why is it that we won't just say, okay, we got the legal tender law passed, forget the dollar, let's go straight to gold and silver?
Yeah, I mean, you would expect, us gold and silver bugs, we would expect, if the government was restricting our ability to use gold and silver as money, then once that restriction was lifted, that we should see the people rejoicing and the Federal Reserve note littering the streets and people trading in sound money again, and this entire scam, finally being rejected. But we don't see that at all. And you might say, well, it's a technicality of how that law was crafted, but it really has nothing to do with it. Even if Ron Paul himself had written the legal tender law of Florida and said, use whatever you want, the Federal Reserve note would still be sticking around. And this is an economic law discovered by a gentleman named Thomas Gresham in the reign of Queen Elizabeth I. So he was and it's known as Gresham's Law. So Thomas Gresham was an advisor to Queen Elizabeth I, and he noticed that when there were two coins of the same face value, so both, one said, a pound sterling, and the other also said a pound sterling, but they had unequal true monetary value. So one was, something like 90% silver, and the other one was 40% silver. People would, of course, they would hoard the coin with more silver. They'd put that in their, safe deposit box for later, and they would go spend the 40% silver coin that said 1 pound. And of course, in a truly free market, when they go to the vendor would say, oh, no, I wasn't born yesterday. I know that coin is 40% silver and that coin is 90% silver. So you need to give me at least 2 of these coins before we even, maybe I'll waive the other 10% for convenience sake, but you need to give me 2 of those lesser value coins before I take on that 90, before I agree to give it the same value, or I'm not going to give it the same value as that 90% silver coin. You need to give me 2 of those before I consider this a fair trade. That's what I'm trying to say. The state would then pass legal tender laws saying, no, you must take these 40% silver coins at face value, equal face value with the 90% silver coins. And so when the free market is allowed to work, like I said, people say, no, you get it. I'm not treating these as equal value notes or equal value coins. If I must treat them as equal value coins, then what does the seller do? The seller assumes he is only going to be paid in the lower value coins because he can't take the risk that he's not going to be paid in the higher value, that he's going to be paid in higher value coins. So he's going to assume that he's only going to be paid in lower value coins. And what is he going to do? He's going to raise his prices because that is the only option open to him. He cannot legally reject the coins being offered to him. So he's going to raise his prices so that it equilibrates with the original price that he was charging. Now, what does that do to the good coins? That drives them into hiding even further, right? People are not, if the prices are now double what they were before, that original 90% silver coin is even more valuable as a unit of raw silver than it is as the, compared to the face monetary value, right? So this drives, Gresham's law, simply stated, as cheap drives out dear. So the good money gets hidden away, stuffed away somewhere, and the bad money starts to circulate. And the bad money can be abused. The state abuses money by printing impure coins and saying that it has the same purity as, previously issued much more pure coins. People abuse coins, the people themselves, by clipping, so that you can, they cut around the edges of the coins. That's what they did in the old days quite a bit. There's a security measure of the ridges. If you've ever seen the ridges of a quarter, that's a security measure to prevent coin clipping. But that's in the old days, merchants would also be presented with coins that were whittled down to 50% or 75% of their original size. And once again, because of legal tender laws, they were being forced to accept it. So when Gresham's law gets going, right, when these coins get degraded, we saw this in ancient Rome. If you look at a history of coinage in ancient Rome, the coins got worse and worse and worse and worse until there was no silver in them at all. There are two solutions to Gresham's law. The first solution is a monetary reformer like Thomas Gresham comes in, and he convinced Queen Elizabeth, because Queen Elizabeth, or maybe her father, I'm not too familiar on Tudor history, but either her or her father or one of her ancestors had started the coin debasement problem. And so he went to her and said, look, we need to reissue high purity silver coins again and reform our economy and, get things working again. And she agreed. And so they had a voluntary reform where they said, hand in your old coins and we'll exchange it for new high value silver, high purity silver coins. And, once again, England was flourishing under a silver standard of honest high value money. The other option is complete financial collapse. So the coins continue to drive, the low value, the coins get worse and worse and worse and worse and worse, and they continue to drive out higher and higher, with higher and higher force the higher value coins. So the higher value coins, and this, once they start issuing 2% silver coins, now even the 30% silver coins are being stashed into a shoebox somewhere, right? And this goes on and on until there's no silver at all, and then there's a complete currency rejection. So that's a hyperinflationary event. It's happened many times in the past. And then the market itself simply, what happens is the vendors simply stop accepting the bad coins. They say, we're not going to take them. It doesn't matter, it doesn't matter what the punishment is. We're just not going to take them. And so the state must, at that point, it will either issue the higher value coins, or it will completely collapse, and then a new state will come in and higher valued coins will be issued once again. So that's all in the traditional application of Gresham's law. In the modern application of Gresham's law, the gold is being stuffed away in Fort Knox, supposedly, right? And they are issuing notes for the gold they definitely don't have all the gold they say they have, because they've printed notes for 90 million tons of gold, against which we have supposedly 8,300 tons of gold in Fort Knox. But the principle remains exactly the same, right? So the stackers, you and me, we have silver dollars. I have a silver dollar. I know you probably have a silver dollar too. we could go spend that silver dollar to buy a stick of chewing gum or a Snickers bar, but you're not going to do that. Why on earth would you do that? Because the silver quantity of that is worth something like $40 right now. And with the stamp, with the stamp and the numismatic value, you're talking something like $45, $50 for a silver eagle. So I'm going to keep the silver dollar and I'm going to put that into my safety deposit box and I'm going to go spend the paper. And everyone is going to continue doing that because of Gresham's law. You keep the good stuff and you send out the bad stuff because people will take it. The only time this will end is when the vendors refuse to take the paper notes as payment for, whatever good and services they're offering. And that includes workers, right? If you as a worker say, I refuse to be paid in Federal Reserve notes, you must pay me in silver for my labor, and everyone does that at the same time, this will end. Now, this can either end with this can end with a monetary reform where we repeg to gold, we take our that's going to hurt. We take our medicine and we go through that reform process voluntarily, or it will happen when the Federal Reserve note completely hyperinflates, it's worth absolutely nothing, and nobody will take it for anything. And they tried there's this idea that if the state enforces it, that it can somehow have value. No, a hyperinflated note has absolutely zero value. So it will be, it will be rejected at some point, and then we will have no choice but to go back to a gold and silver standard. And then, of course, people will start all the way over from scratch, where they're weighing out the silver on the scale and testing it for purity, doing the biting of the coin and stuff like that, until real currency, until either state issued or market issued currency gets issued out again.
You mentioned the introduction of reeded edges, the little ridges on the edges of coins to make it more obvious whether they've been clipped or not. There's an interesting Wikipedia article about debasement. If you just look up debasement on Wikipedia, it's fantastic. We had a viewer who wrote in a comment under one of our interviews about 2 weeks ago, talking about a more subtle way than clipping the outside edges that was prevalent. And it's even covered in a book from 1893 about old gold and silver coins. That's just placing a number of them in a bag and shaking it like a leather bag. And even if you put some sand in there or something abrasive to get what looks like a natural wear on the coin, so it's less obvious, but you end up with some gold dust or silver dust in the bottom of the bag at the end of the day. And anyway, so yes, that is a challenge when people are realizing they don't want to give up the real thing just for ordinary transactions. It's ironic because, as you point out, there's this dichotomy, because that's the only way to preserve your purchasing power is to hold the real money. In fact, our good friend James Rawls from survivalblog.com, who has interviewed us, he operates a website where he sells antique firearms that are exempt from a lot of gun restrictions, and he has dual prices posted on his website. The FRN price, the Federal Reserve Note price, which continually has to be increased because of debasement of the currency and inflation, and the price in ounces of silver, which stays rock solid typically over time. So it's interesting.
So the Florida gold and silver legal tender laws are fine. They're not hurting anything. And honestly, Florida might get a head start in restarting the economy once the crash starts, because of these laws already exist. But all the states are going to quickly have to pass similar laws. Once the FRN dies, they're gonna have no choice. I mean, there's not gonna be like, oh yeah, we're gonna make a North Carolina Federal Reserve note. They're not gonna be able to start a new Ponzi scheme immediately off of that. They're gonna have no choice but to either watch everybody starve to death and have burning pitchforks and torches at the state capitol buildings, or they're going to pass legal tender laws that allow people to trade in whatever they want, or even more ideally, everyone's just going to ignore whatever the state has to say anyway and trade in whatever they want anyway.
Freedom can be a very liberating thing. We're in favor of it. You had another question here about these sort of end game scenarios. A lot of people ask me, as a preparedness journalist over the past decade plus, what to anticipate, what to prepare for And a breakdown of civil society is one of the things that concerns many of our audience. And you had a question, if civil society completely breaks down, how do property rights get reestablished so that we don't spin off into a zombie apocalypse?
Yeah, so I get this question a lot from people who email me. They say, you have this idea you're going to buy mansions on riverfront mansions for 100 ounces of silver in hyperinflation. How are we supposed to do that if the buildings are on fire and the county offices are down and no one's going to recognize the property rights transfer? Like how is this supposed to happen? And the stated risk of zombie apocalypse level crash is, in my view, overblown. And as a historic example, let's look at what happened when the USSR collapsed. So the Russian people in the USSR and the people in the Soviet bloc, right? They went through Imperial Russia, then they went through the Russian Revolution, then they went through Lenin, then they went through Stalin. Then they went through 50 years of Khrushchev, Brezhnev, Chernenko, Andropov, the Soviet decay where just, nothing got done. And everyone, the old Soviet joke, they pretended to pay me, so I pretended to work. Just total, just, painted over rust was the Soviet Union. And then it collapsed in 1991. And you'd think, these people hadn't had property rights. They didn't own their house. They didn't own their apartment. It was all, there was no agency to recognize property ownership at that time. So if you were to see zombie apocalypse, that would have been the time to see it. You should have seen it at that time. What did you see? We definitely saw a lot of chaos. And the people, the pensioners who expected the state to take care of them for the rest of their lives because they had put in, they'd done their time through the Soviet bureaucracy. Yeah, they got totally screwed. But for a young entrepreneur, it was basically a golden age. I mean, you could go, if you had the ambition, you had the drive, you could go make something of yourself. Look, I mean, not all of it was salutary, not all of it was wholesome the way we would, like it to be or think it should be. But, they pulled out of the tailspin, and they pulled out fairly quickly. In fact, far more people died when Stalin had total control of the state. When the state had total control, millions and millions and millions of people died. When the state lost total control and there was no control, yeah, there was chaos. And yeah, some people died. And people got screwed over. I'm not saying 1992 Russia was just, a wonderful place to be, but there was no zombie apocalypse, and they figured it out and they pulled out of the tailspin. So let's philosophically. So I think a lot of zombie apocalypse stuff is doom porn. I think people get, they start getting ideas in their heads like, oh, this, when society breaks down, it's going to break down completely, and neighbors are going to turn on neighbors, and we're just going to return to like this Hobbesian state of nature. So let's philosophically discuss where property rights come from, so we can see how they might be reestablished if they break down. And I just mentioned a term called the Hobbesian state of nature. This is from Thomas Hobbes. The Hobbesian state of nature, as viewed by him, was sort of like humans are little more than dogs, like walking in the forest, right? So I'll be walking in the forest, and I see something I can eat, so I'll just pick it up and eat it, and then throw away whatever's there, whatever's the rind or whatever. And then I see a female in the forest, so I attempt mating with her. And then I see a larger male in the forest, so I run away from him. And I act little more than a dog. I walk around. I don't think anything beyond my next meal and my physical appetites, right? And the humans don't really act like that. The Hobbesian state of nature is really just it's an academic construct. It's a way to think about like what we would be like if we were dogs. But I
thought he founded the School of Modern American Advertising. But okay, go ahead.
Yes. But people instinctively, where there's just something in our brains, we instinctively abhor the state of nature. We abhor it so much that we immediately form into groups for collective defense. And this was in pre-civilization. This was tribes. So we were all walking around. When we came out of the forest, we started forming, little tribes where we band together and say, okay, I'm good. You stay awake tonight to keep the lions away, and I'll sleep, and then I'll do the same thing tomorrow. And whatever, we'll build a fence structure and all that kind of stuff, right? Now, once you have property rights established, right? Once you have a collective defense perimeter around your little village, then you can build a hut, right? I can go build a hut in my village, and my wife and our children can live in the hut, and I can go out and bring things back to the hut, and I can put things into the hut, and you can do the same thing, and you can do that with the security knowing that I'm not going, while you're away hunting, I'm not going to walk into your hut and have my way with your wife and eat all your food and take your shovel. Right? Because we have a collective agreement not to do that to each other. And in fact, when people do break that agreement, especially back then, the punishment was draconian. Up until very recently, the punishment for breaking the public peace was, quite often just a hanging. Just get this guy out of our lives. Now, other tribes don't respect your property right. That was a big problem was, you have your defensive, collection of huts with the fence around them, and there's another one over there, but they're a little bit bigger and stronger, so they came over, and they don't respect your property rights at all. So, they burn down your huts, they take your women, they take your children, they either kill you or chase you off into the forest, and they take all your tools, right? But when they take it back to their tribe, now they divvy it amongst themselves, and now they are respecting now they have respect for their property rights within the confines of their little group. So property rights only exist. We feel like this is this objective truth. Like I own my house, right? I'm sitting in it. I own it. I have legal claim to it. I objectively own it, and I own everything in it. That's only true as long as everyone agrees to respect that I own it. In fact, a burglar disagrees with you that you have property rights to your house. Now, there are, especially in America, there are tools that we can use to persuade the burglar that we in fact do have property rights to our house and everything inside of it. But he's still in his deep in his mind, he does not believe in respecting other people's property rights. The burglar, right? Anyway, going back to the tribes real quick. So successful tribes expand into civilizations. So you can instead of just one tribe where everybody knows each other and there's like a village chief arbitrating, you can expand to these great civilizations. And civilizations required and created written laws to define property rights. So then you had, Hammurabi, King Solomon. They started writing things down. Okay, this is your house. No one's allowed to come in and have their way with your wife and take all your stuff out of it. And these are the punishments for doing so. And like I said, they were often very draconian. We can, it's a conversation for another day whether we're too soft in the modern context for violating property rights. But that, like I said, that's a concept for another day or a conversation for another day. And great civilizational leaders, like I just mentioned, right? King Solomon, Hammurabi, they are recognized as being brilliant civilizational leaders. They led their civilizations into golden ages because they protected property rights. They established and protected property rights. And terrible leaders like Mao and Hitler did not respect property rights and are damned by history. Now, there is one category of leader, like the conqueror, like Genghis Khan, even though he did not respect property rights at all, because he brought lots of loot back for his people. The Mongols have statues of him all over Mongolia. So there is that aspect. But in general, I'm going to break it into two. Right? There's the just king, there's the wise king, the wise leader, and then there's the tyrant. And people respect the wise leader, and they hate the tyrants. And it really boils down to how much the leader respected property rights or not. Now, what property rights do is they allow division of labor and they allow savings, because if I'm in the state of nature, right, I can't even sharpen a stick. I can't make a tool, because if I sharpen a stick and then I put the stick by a tree because I have to go pee or something, right? When I come back, someone else has taken my stick, right? But if I have property rights, if I have property over that stick, I can safely put it there, knowing another one of my tribesmen is not going to take my stuff. Now I can do something like I could save a bunch of food, and then I can work on making an axe. Now that I have an axe, I can, build a bigger hut. I can build an extension to hut, right? So when you have savings, and savings require property rights to save them, otherwise people are going to come steal them from you, you can have specialization of labor. Now I can become, instead of all of us being hunter-gatherers, I can be a blacksmith and you can be a farmer, right? And we can save our crops, and you can save your crops in the field, knowing reasonably safely that people are not going to descend on them like a bunch of locusts at harvest time. Right? So property rights, once again, allow us to build great civilizations.
And including intellectual property rights.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a much more modern concept. But yes, absolutely. Right? Respecting your intellectual property rights, which other civilizations don't do very much. So in the end game, if property rights start to break down at the civilizational level, and again, I'm not calling for this at all. I think we're just going to have a nasty financial crash. I'm not calling for the doom porn, but let's philosophically go into it. So in the end game, if property rights really start to break down at the civilizational level, tribes, gangs, and militias form at the local level to protect property rights within their communities. So you're just, I mean, in some of your viewers are probably forming, they're probably in, armed neighborhood watches. Let's not go to the point of militia, but I've certainly talked to a few of my neighbors. I'm like, look, if things go bad, you have a gun, I have a gun, we all have guns. We'll create an armed neighborhood watch and we'll go around and protect. Because I'm in a fairly blue area, but there's always people around that are like-minded. It's not everybody, but there are people around who will, who are armed and will, protect you. Yeah, get a reflective defense.
I'll corroborate that over the years, when our channel was called Reluctant Preppers, and it's still about liberty and finance. Liberty, part of your freedom is the freedom to accumulate the fruits of your labor and for your financial future and that of your children and so on, for future needs and necessities. And anyway, in conversations with numerous people who have been very thoughtful and mindful about strategic relocation and defensive architecture, et cetera, that's one of the things that they often mention to me is something that they were very intentional about, was choosing a location where they're surrounded by like-minded neighbors. Sometimes it's retired military, retired law enforcement. Sometimes it's those who have very strong agrarian values and the ability to help each other in that sense, to be successful at growing and producing food. And that these are extremely valuable concepts to put into your strategic planning. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, and in cities, it'll be urban gangs. I mean, urban gangs will form. And look, I mean, is it great to have urban gangs? No, but they do protect the property rights within their communities. Now, the violence, I'm going to get into the Kosian solution in a second, but the violence in gangland occurs at the border between two different rival gang tribes. It doesn't really occur within each gang section. And same thing with the mafia, right? I grew up in New York, and the mafia was active, and you had to pay, if you're a baker, you had to pay to make sure something didn't happen to your goods. But you didn't, it was de minimis. The amount the baker or the local hardware store had to pay the mafia was fairly small. You really only got in trouble with the mafia if you got into bed with them. So you start engaging in their vices, because they ran the brothels, they run the gambling place. So yeah, you go get into heavy debt with a mafia guy, you're going to get in a lot of trouble. But the mafia had to have the support, at least the toleration of the neighborhood, because that was their community, right? The people grew up in this community. Some became the mafia, others became the cops, and there was this sort of an uneasy, alliance between the two, or not alliance, uneasy truce between the two for most times, until trouble gets started and then the cops have to go crack things down, right? But they would, and I'm, as someone who grew up in New York City, they will protect the neighborhoods that are paying them protection money. In fact, in some cases, they're private security, and again, it's private security sometimes against themselves, but they would provide better security than the public police officers in some situations. For example, if you have a homeless bum sitting in front of your storefront and he's shooting up heroin and he's harassing the customers, you call the police and they come over and they, I'm sorry, he's on public property, he's on a public street, he has his rights to be here, there's nothing we can do, and they drive away. You call Tony Knuckles, he shows up and he convinces the bum to go shoot up somewhere else. I mean, that's, it is what it is, Anyway, so these things form, tribes, gangs, militias, depending on how you want to think of it, armed neighborhood watches. These will automatically form in the end game. It's the same thing as when we climbed down out of the trees and started building huts in the African savannah. It'll be the same thing, just, in suburbia. And so what does this look like? And I want to give an example. There's another economist named Ronald Coase, and Ronald Coase came up with the Kosian solution of the Coase theorem, and I invite everyone to look that up on their own time. COASE theorem, and it states that once property rights are established, the most economically advantageous solution will occur regardless of the distribution of those property rights. So what do I mean? Let's talk about this in the end game. So I want you to imagine the end game is hit, and it is a zombie apocalypse. Things have really gone to pot, and there is a village, and there is a farmer, and there are some farms over here, and there's a road that connects the two. So and some bandits have come and they've set up on the road. So every time the farmer tries to send crops into town, the bandits jump out and they shoot the driver and they take all the stuff and run into the forest. And same thing, everything, goods come from the town out to the farms. Once again, the bandits pop out, they shoot the driver, take all the stuff. So what does the town and the farmers do? They raise a posse. Right, we need to take control of this road. We're going to raise a posse and chase the bandits out. So let's say the posse and the bandits meet on the road, and the bandits win. So they kill or drive off the posse. The town says, okay, we need to solve this because we're going to starve to death if we don't get crops in, and we can't have these guys, killing our drivers. So they send a representative to the bandits. They say, look, you have established property rights over this road. People say that's not property rights. Well, in the primitive sense, it is property rights. You are sitting on this road and you are armed and you are shooting anyone who tries to take away your newly found property rights. So we of the village will recognize that you have property rights over this road. However, if you keep killing us, we're all going to starve to death or leave, and the farmers are not going to send any crops in because they're not getting paid. So we'll tell you what we'll do. We will make you chief of security of this road, and we will pay you a toll. So every time a truck comes through, we'll pay you a toll, and you can earn your money that way. So you'll be security of the road, right? And the bandit king will agree to that because otherwise, the other choice is to have the road be abandoned because eventually no one's going to send crops with 100% guarantee that they're not going to make it into town, right? So now let's imagine. So what's the outcome? A toll road, and eventually, and this toll road starts. That the farmers and they're driving, and some teenager jumps out of the forest. You need to pay the toll, and is waving a gun in your face. So the villager comes back again and says, "Look, we don't want to have guns waved in our face. We'll pay the toll, but stop having these teenagers wave a gun in your face." And the bandit king thinks, okay, you know what? That's probably a good, it's a poor use of resources to have these young, very physically fit men just running a toll road. So we'll get this plump old lady, we'll put a yellow vest on her, and we'll give her, we'll give the toll road, the gate, we'll give her the control of the gate button, and it'll be nice and friendly, right? So now on, you have a nice lady in a yellow vest, and she takes your toll. Now, if you don't pay the toll, you're going to get an angry man waving a gun in your face. He's going to come to your house and wave a gun in your face. But, just pay the toll. There's no more killing on the road, right? Now, let's say the village wins the fight. So we're going to go back. So the village is having a gun battle with the bandits, and the village wins and drives them all out of the forest. So the village leaders sit around and say, okay, well, we've driven them off, but they're going to come back, or another group's going to come. So you know what we need to do? We need to have armed security patrol this road, and we have to pay for that. So you know what we're going to do? We're going to set up a toll road. So we're going to have armed security patrolling the road, and we're going to put a toll road right in the middle, and we're going to have people come through. And anytime people come through, they got to pay the toll because we have to protect this road. So what happened? You have the exact same solution no matter who won the battle, right? It doesn't matter who wins the battle, who establishes the property rights. The result is the same. You're paying a toll, and you have a secure toll road with which you may travel through. Now, many of you are saying, well, this sounds bad. I don't want to live in the apocalypse. You live in this now, right? You pay when you go down a toll road, you pay that toll. And if you don't pay that toll, you will have armed gunmen waving guns in your face and coming to take your property. It's exactly the same thing as it is right now. So
I was going to say the only difference I can figure between your story and modern real life is that in your story, there's a recognition of sanity that the parasite will kill the host and will have nothing to feed off of. Whereas so far, it seems that the current parasite class is under the expectation that they can go ahead and increase the pain and reduce the population, et cetera, and kill off the host and go on living on their own. So that'll be interesting to see if it reverts to sanity the way your story did.
It absolutely will revert more to sanity just because the global, it'll be local. The tyrants will be local, let me put it that way. And they'll be competing with each other to be less tyrannical. So competition is far more important than democracy. That's a conversation for another day. Maybe next episode we can talk about that. Anyway, so as a corollary for question 2, let me answer this question. So we've gone through the whole thing of property rights and how they will get reestablished. Even in the worst zombie apocalypse scenario you could think of, property rights will quickly get reestablished, even on these weird, maybe a bandit king is, running the road instead of the state of Florida. But whatever, the property rights will get reestablished, I promise.
Yeah, you told us that you're going to explain how in a end game scenario where gold and silver basically have been chased into hiding by cheap money, but then the cheap money is devolving until it's basically worthless, and we have to resort to sound money. How people can reestablish, or hope to be able to reestablish, ownership of, for example, real estate using gold and silver in that scenario.
Yeah. So yeah, like I said, is the corollary to question 2. I'm going to answer the question directly. How am I supposed to turn, in these kind of scenarios, how am I supposed to turn this stack of silver into this riverfront mansion that you keep telling me I could buy for 100 ounces of silver? Excuse me. So I don't have, one simple trick to protect your property rights to the in-game. But what I can say with absolute certainty is that the worse things get, the cheaper they get in gold and silver terms. So 100 ounces of silver for a penthouse apartment in New York City, that's a number I've thrown out recently. Rafi agrees with me. Other people have, confirmed that's a reasonable expectation in hyperinflation. That's for deed in hand. That is for the property being transferred from your name to my name. So if the agency responsible for recognizing the deed is shut down, then you have to revert to a bill of sale, right? We have to do this contract where, you fill it out and you say, I have sold this apartment to Phil for 100 ounces of silver. And then when the lights come back on, I should be able to take that bill of sale down to the county office, excuse me, and turn that, have the property recognized as being transferred from you to me, right? That's not worth as much as deed in hand, right? That is worth, let's say that's worth 30 ounces of silver off the bat, and then maybe another 50 ounces of silver once the deed has been transferred to me, right? Because I've taken all the risk of that situation, right? Maybe the lights come back on and suddenly the seller says, you know what, I don't really want, thanks for that silver, but I don't really want to sell my house to you after all. I don't want to complete this paperwork process. Now we have to go to court. We got to get before a judge. You have, these days you have no idea what the judge is going to be like. So I have no, I'm not an expert on real estate law, and maybe someone should talk to an expert on real estate law if you seriously have these considerations, but I will give you I'm thinking of some potential strategies to employ in such a situation. So first off, get a testimonial that everything is voluntary. I would even record it. I would record the transaction. And the property is expected to be transferred to you in the future for the money now, right? So write everything down in the contract, like I said. Record the entire transaction, including pushing the silver over to the other party, right? Because they're going to say, oh, I never got this, I never got any money. What are you talking about, right? So record it, record their taking possession of it. Like I said, pay 30% upon the bill of sale and 70% when the title's transferred. Or like I said, maybe the total price is lower because of, this increased burden on your end. When you do that, the seller will still be poor and is not going to be in much of a position to renege. So you're keeping, a small pile of silver to keep them fed through the worst parts of the end game. And then the rest of the silver, once the lights start coming back on and you can actually take possession of the property. And another option would be don't retain them as tenants. I mean, a lot of people are thinking, oh, I'll buy my neighbor's house and I'll have them rent back to me. If you're worried about property rights being respected, then have them move out. Say, I will give you 100 ounces of silver on move out. Here's 10 ounces of silver now to pay the movers, and here's the other 90 on move out day. Because if you even if you get before a pretty, radical judge, they're going to have a much harder time if they took your money and left and you got a new tenant and put that new tenant in the house. The judge is going to have to say, okay, new tenant, you have to leave. You have to make room for this original owner who's going to move back in. The judge is going to have a very hard time jumping through the hoops necessary to say that person did not recognize that they were selling the house to you, right? That the property did not transfer. If the seller is still in the house as a tenant, and let's say the judge is likewise got kicked out of his house or something, he's not in a sympathetic mood to the landlords. He's going to say, well, you didn't cross this X, you didn't dot this T, or you didn't cross this T, dot this I. This property contract is null and void, and the original seller gets to keep their house, and tough luck for a swell guy buyer, right? You could run into it. I don't expect you'll run into a judge like that, but you can always risk running into a judge like that. So make it as hard as possible for the judge to have to jump through all those intellectual hoops to give your property back to this other person that you purchased in good faith. Now, again, let's go back to the doom porn for a second. If things really break down, then the center of property rights jurisdiction is going to change. It's not going to be the county office. The county office may not exist. The lights might go out and they might never come back on. So what are you supposed to do in that situation? A leader will emerge in a crisis situation like that. The property rights will get reestablished, as I've covered before. Nature abhors a vacuum. People collectivize, and they form groups. And so, someone like your son's high school gym teacher, Mike, might become a local warlord, and you'll go to him to resolve your property rights disputes. You'll say, "Oh, great Mike, lord of the cul-de-sac at the end of Cinnamon Tree Lane, ruler of all he surveys. I gave this woman silver for her house and she refuses to move out and she refuses to pay rent. Please help us resolve this property dispute. Oh, great one," right? So we'll take it back to like a feudal lord kind of situation where you appeal to whoever the local warlord is. And you honestly, the stackers might end up becoming the local leaders as well, because you'll be the ones with money. So you'll be able to hire the security. You'll be the ones in charge of the perimeter defenses. And so you might end up taking leadership positions within this new community as well. Again, this is doom porn. I don't think it's really going to happen, but let's talk about it as if it is. You can also, in this kind of scenario, you can use a silver to grease the wheels of justice in your favor. You're going to have the money. These other people are not going to have the money, and there's no shame in greasing the wheels of justice as long as the original contract being disputed was honest on your end, right? If this person, because if you agreed to buy this house for 100 ounces of silver when silver was at its absolute peak monetary value, and then the crisis passed and this person is trying to renege on transferring the property to you, that is theft. They are trying to steal your property from you, and you should not let them do that. Now, there's no shame, and in my view, there's no moral shame in the zombie apocalypse scenario, greasing the wheels of justice to make sure that you get your property transferred to you as it should have been. But, that'll be up to the moral person, the morality of the person making these decisions. Again, and once again, in a real lights out situation, in a real crisis situation like that, possession is going to be 9/10 of the law whenever the lights come back on. Whenever fragile new government, if the government completely breaks down and then it reforms, it's going to be very fragile on the reformation. And it's going to be like the USSR in 1992. They're just going to say, okay, you were living in that apartment, that's now your apartment. You were living on that farm, that's now your farm. Do with it what you will. That's your property now, right? So the government's just going to recognize whoever was sitting on the property as having owned it, and it will not be in a position to comb through lengthy property contracts trying to resolve all these, complex deals. So I would say the most important thing, actually, and I should have mentioned this earlier, the most important thing is only do business with people you can trust. So if you don't trust the person you're doing business with, then don't do business with them, because there's not going to be in this kind of lights out situation, there's going to be no one to call. So if you cannot work with the person and deal with them honestly, and they will deal honestly with you, and you guys can shake each other's hands and, understand that you're both going to respect both sides of this deal, then don't do business with them. Don't go into business with them at all. There'll be plenty of other houses to buy with people that you can actually do business with them. And then, so more broadly, just to finish this out, more broadly, the reason property will be so cheap partly is because of the risk, right? So there's a reason that penthouse apartment in New York City with a view of Central Park is $5,000 in today's money for you to purchase. Part of that's the risk that this is not going to work out, right? Now, most of it is actually just the extreme value of money. It's like giving water to a man in the desert, right? The marginal value of that water is worth absolutely everything to him. He's like, if I don't get this bottle of water, I'm going to die. I'm never going to see my children again. Therefore, the first bottle of water is there is no price he will not pay. He'll give you the deed to his house for that bottle of water. In this kind of monetary collapse, the money is basically like a bottle of water. There is no price that they will not pay to get their hands on a little bit of money so that they can go buy food and water. Anyway, so in an apartment in New York City during the world's largest financial panic with a communist mayor, New York City now is, it looks like they're going to elect a hard communist mayor. He's going to be, if he actually is mayor during the crisis, he's probably going to be seizing all and sundry. And it's, buying that apartment in New York City is going to look like the stupidest investment idea ever. Your wife is going to yell at you She's going to say, do not buy this apartment in New York City. I don't care if it's only $5,000. New York City's on fire. There's no police. There's no fire department. People are dying on the streets. What on earth makes you think anyone's ever going to want to live there again? You are making a bet that this crisis is temporary and that the value of that penthouse apartment with a view of Central Park is going to recover. And I think it's a very good bet to make. I definitely do. Personally, am I planning to take risky positions like that? If the opportunity presents itself, I probably will take a couple. I'm not gonna put my entire life savings into New York City real estate during a large financial panic. But I don't. I would love to take some risk with that kind of situation, and I'll put up with my wife yelling at me that it's a terrible idea and I shouldn't do it. But I would say to the people investing this, or to people thinking about investing these kind of crisis situations, don't be afraid to go out on a limb or two, because that is where all the fruit will be.
Phil, you always give us a lot of food for thought, and you deal with a lot more topics than the few that we've been able to talk about together. Where should people go to get more of your frequent posts and updates on such subjects?
Sure. You can reach me at thebitterdraft@gmail.com if you want to talk to me directly. And you can find me on Rumble, ideally, at The Bitter Draft. I am also on YouTube at The Bitter Draft, and I am on X, The Bitter Draft.
We're always grateful for your presence with us, and it's educational, it's entertaining, it raises lots of additional questions. Folks, don't hesitate to pose any follow-up questions that you have for Phil, or any comments on steps you may have taken in the directions towards the end game and towards securing your property rights. If you have any additional thoughts for the rest of our community here, that's why we have comments enabled underneath our video. So go ahead, feel free to comment in a constructive and supportive way. We want any good and respectful communications that can come through this to educate all of us and edify all of us. Phil, you're a big part of generating that interest and the discussions here on Liberty and Finance. We're always grateful for your presence. Thanks for joining us again.
My pleasure, Donegan. Take care.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 23rd through June 30th, 2025, while supplies last. This week we feature 1-ounce silver backdated Australian Kangaroos at just $2.99 over spot per ounce. And with the Australian Kangaroo Monster Box at just 250 ounces, these are some of the lowest priced monster boxes on the market. Next, backdated platinum 1-ounce Australian platypus coins are just $119 over spot. And 1 10th-ounce Canadian maple leaves are only $45 over melt per coin. And finally, constitutional silver dealer's choice dimes and quarters are just 99 cents over spot per ounce. Again, some of the lowest premiums we've seen on silver in years. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.